order.
The recording has started.
A little more formal. Can we all rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
And justice for all.
Mary, you're not muted, I think.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'll start again. This is the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee meeting for June 4th, 6 p.m. via WebEx. Before I go to item number 2, I just want to make a quick announcement for anyone who is listening from the public that most of the agenda and the documents for the meeting are posted under the Board of Finance, and then the second to the last item is the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee. So you should be able to pull up the internal audit report and the other documents that we were provided for this meeting, with the exception of the draft report that we received. So with that said, I think we can now proceed to item number 2, which is to recommend the auditors for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. And this is pretty much a formality, but we will recommend them at the next meeting of the full Board of Finance, and that has to be done this month so that they can begin their audit for the fiscal year in June 30th, 2021. So I guess we should make a motion to recommend that we retain our current auditors. Looking for the full name, PKF O'Connor Davies, to perform the annual audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. Does someone want to second that? Okay. And then all in favor? Unless there's any discussion. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, so that motion passes 3-0. Okay. Item number 3 is to discuss the draft report of the Public Works Department review report on results of the procedures performed. The board has received a draft report from our auditor, Mr. Centopani, who is here to answer any of our questions. It is a preliminary draft. It still has to go through his firm's technical review procedures, and it also still needs to be presented to administration for their comments on, I guess, cash disbursement testing and procurement testing, I think I have that correct. So I'd like to open it up to the board to ask Mr. Centopani any questions you may have, because our goal here is to get this report to a final report as soon as possible. So I guess, Mr. Centopani, I'd like to ask, what is the timing of that, and what do we need to do in order to get it to the final report?
Okay, so I guess the timing would be to set a deadline for getting any comments back to me, and then within 1 week of that, I'd be able to turn the report around. So if we wanted to say by next, not tomorrow, but the following Friday, any comments from the board other than what I hear tonight, and any comments from administration, that you get them to me by Friday, a week from tomorrow, and then I would turn around the draft the following week by Friday the latest. So set that and get everything back, and then we'll get it finalized.
Okay.
Okay. That works for everybody? Okay.
Mary, you're not, your voice isn't coming through. Sorry.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Got it. Okay, sorry about that. I couldn't get the screen to open up. Okay, thank you. Oh, I think that should be ample time for us to respond back to you. I know Lori has already given me some comments, and some of them I have passed on to you, some I haven't, and some I think she would like to discuss with you in person. So I guess from my perspective, there's a few things that I was wondering if you could add some definitions into the report as far as what the quick alert system is and does, because it's something that I'm not really familiar with. So I think the basic reader probably is not familiar with it either, and we want it to be user-friendly, that anyone can pick it up and understand what they are. So if there's things like that that you could explain what that program does and what that is, that would be helpful. And then I guess I can pass it on to, I think we have another visitor. So this is the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee meeting. Sorry. So, Lori, do you want to ask him?
Okay, wait a second. Hold on. Mr. Bowen? Mr. Bowen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong meeting.
Is the other meeting operating?
It is.
Okay.
So, Mr. Keller, can you tell him where the meeting is?
Can
Hi,
you
Mr.
repeat that,
Bowen.
please?
If you can send me your email address in the chat, I will send you the instructions to get into the HDC test meeting.
Okay. What is your email address?
Can you send it to me in the chat? Move your mouse down to the bottom of the screen. Click the button that says chat. And then you can send me your email. You send me your email address privately.
Click which button now?
Okay, wait a second. We're not gonna get anything done here. So we need to move this along. So we have it in the chat. Is there, hit the little chat, hit the blue button. It says chat.
Okay.
Okay. And then find, Town of Fairfield, host and presenter.
Sheila just sent me your email address. I will send you the instructions in a minute, James.
Okay.
Okay?
Oh, wait a minute.
Okay, I don't think we'll have any more disturbances.
Sorry about that, everyone. Jim and Lori, do you have questions for Mr. Centofanti?
this is Lori Charlton. I have some questions on the draft report, if I can. Okay. So first of all, Mr. Centofanti, I'd like to thank you for the work that you and your team put into the draft. There's a lot here. I think we have in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 specific issues that have been identified, plus a number of process improvement suggestions. And I will say I found the report to be educational and helpful in understanding where we have opportunities to improve. And I look forward to it being finalized. Respecting that it's still a draft, I do have a few questions on the report, and I think they may be useful to address now and appropriate so that we can get clarity in the final report and perhaps, in management's responses. And I apologize to the public. I know that the draft is not available because it's a draft, but you'll have to bear with us, I suppose. Mr. Centofanti, on page 8, my first question relates to the recommendation here that covers the Parks Division, and specifically your comment relates to expenditures for outsourced park maintenance. And your recommendation is that the town perform an analysis of the maintenance contract and the costs, given that the amounts paid probably in 2019 to the vendor were in excess of the bid award. Can you provide some clarity on the analysis that you think the town should perform? What periods should it cover, and what are the objectives of that analysis that you're looking, we should make sure we achieve?
Yeah, the analysis would just be, I guess there used to be town employees doing this, and then it was outsourced. And normally outsourced may be cheaper, but just looking at some of the numbers and then based upon, again, the comment was made by the person that used to have a team of 6, but it was made, so I felt it was important at least to communicate, to take a look at it, because that concern was expressed. I think the analysis would be, if you had X amount of people, would you incur all these extras? And everyone does acknowledge that there are a lot of requests that are outside of that contract. So I don't know if there's a way to balance that with maybe there's 2 employees instead of the 6, or just a normal cost analysis of what's going on with the contract. And if you had in-house people to do that, it would the cost be more manageable? And so would you want that?
So in 2019, the costs paid to that outside vendor were $711,000. In 2020, through the date of your report, it's roughly $380,000. And the idea is to do an analysis to reevaluate whether outsourcing is still more efficient than, performing these services in-house, and whether we've got amounts, make sure all the amounts that we pay were appropriate. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and again, it may be a combination that works, because again, all the extras that getting done, maybe if, again, you had 2 employees and not outsource the whole thing, then maybe the cost would end up lower. They would cover what you're asking, the extra things that you're asking the outsource companies to do.
Okay. All right. And so Ms. Fox, I guess, or whoever's going to be responsible for this analysis, I mean, is that clear to you what that recommendation is and what we're trying to achieve there?
Yes,
Caitlin, I don't know if you're
yes.
Okay. All right. My next question is, starting on page 12 of the report, you have provided a number of recommendations that relate to the need to complete physical inventories for spare parts and supplies in certain departments. And those recommendations that you've laid out relate to inventory for the town garage, for the building maintenance division, and for streets and highways. So I guess first maybe a question for Ms. Bossy. To your knowledge, has the town done any physical inventories in recent years in these areas?
I believe we did a physical inventory, but vehicles only, how many years ago?
About 4 years ago, Lori.
Okay, so it's been a while. Okay. All right. One of the things I think that would be helpful, and I don't know that this is for Mr. Centofanti, maybe it's for management when they respond to these recommendations, but I think it would be helpful to get additional clarity on the dollars that we're talking about here, and not just the dollar amount of the inventory on hand, but also on the throughput of expense that flows through these inventory accounts. It seems to me that if, the opportune time to address this comment and try to get these inventories done, if ideally, would be on or before June 30th, so that whatever adjustments come out of them can be reflected in our financial statements. But I do acknowledge that dollars are important in making that determination. So, except for the town garage, where I think we've said the inventory is roughly $100,000, I didn't see an indication of how material or immaterial these various inventory balances are. But I think, determining that, once we determine that, I think it would be ideal if possible if we could address this recommendation before the fiscal year end. So I guess I just wanted to share that thought and get any reaction from Ms. Bossy or Ms. Axel.
We can certainly look at it. Just keep in mind that we keep accounts payable open through mid-August. So it's physically, literally impossible to do it as of June 30 because we are still expensing back to that date. But prior, maybe after we close accounts payable and we get our final expense numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll, guess leave that up to you. But if it's been a number of years, it seems to me that that's important to do, because as I read these recommendations, it feels like we're missing some very basic controls here. We, are obviously not doing inventories, we're not reconciling purchases to what goes into the inventory accounts, and so I think there's a fair amount of risk there that we, depending on the dollar amounts, we should be doing inventories periodically. I also, if we're going to do an inventory, again, depending on the dollars, I think it's important that we have, the right people involved. I mean, normally, and I don't know if this is for Connie, but it would be helpful if someone outside the department is involved as well in overseeing the process, because otherwise the physical inventory is really not much of a control. So that's, as we think about doing this going forward, we should make sure that we get it right in that regard. The other question I have on this whole set of comments, and this is for Mr. Centofanti, if you can provide in the report perhaps a little more clarity and consistency around the recommendations in this, spare parts and supplies inventory area between the town garage and building maintenance and streets and highway. I mean, you have recommended physical inventories in all cases, but there are some other policy descriptions and recommendations, including reconciling purchases to inventory additions and, safeguarding controls over the inventory. So those vary between the different departments. So if you could just perhaps clarify why the recommendations might be different for each or why they're not applicable, I think that would be helpful in the final report.
Okay, I think the reason it's different is we'll say the parts inventory is actually an inventory system. There's something to reconcile to. The other inventories, they purchase it and put it in the closet. There's not really anything to reconcile to, but there is a sign-out sheet, and so it's monitored a little bit more informally, but this is more your typical formal inventory part system like any would have, so that procedures around that are a little bit stricter than, or there's more things to reconcile to. And just so for your perspective, generally, and $100,000 sounds like a big number, but none of this is recorded as inventory on the financial statements. So everything it's inventoried in a sense, but it hasn't been, because of the dollar amount, recorded as inventory. Everything has been expensed.
Got it. Now, that's fine from a financial statement perspective. I'm just thinking more about, that's why I was wondering what the throughput is, right, and not just the balance. How many dollars are we talking about here where we're buying these supplies and these inventory and we don't really have a process to count or reconcile them. So, okay. I was going to move on to a question I had on page 18, unless Jim or Mary, you have anything before then?
Well, it's just, we're not really supposed to be talking about like the contents of the report and how we're going to handle it, but it's more what you would like to have added into the report. So if that's something you want Joe to include in the report, then continue on.
Yeah, I think the clarification on those items would be helpful. And I don't want to get too much into the content, but some of the ones I'm mentioning because I think it's timely in terms of management's response, in terms of, when we address these things. Just on page 18, there's a recommendation here about, there's a discussion about grant accounting, reporting, and administration in public works. And there's a recommendation that it be centralized in the finance department. And I guess my request there is, can you just elaborate the report a little more why you're making that recommendation? What it says in the report is that, you're recommending that all this be centralized in finance, and you say that the engineering department devotes a significant amount of time to grant accounting and administration, but presumably then the finance department would have to spend that same time. So is this an efficiency play, or is it a matter of effectiveness in terms of how that process is carried out? I think that would be helpful to clarify as the basis for your recommendation. Just in general, I'm certainly not going to go through each item in the report, but back to my inventory comment, as a general comment, and to Mr. Secretary, whether you do this or whether we cover this in management's response, I think for each item, we really need more of an understanding of the magnitude of each of these issues. So for example, in some cases, we've pointed to things around segregation of duties or with billings and cash collections that are processed by the department. And it's just hard to judge how concerning these issues may be in relative terms without understanding, is this a $500 issue or is it a, $100,000 issue? So I think if you have that information readily available and you could perhaps add that to the final version of the report, or if not, if management can add that information when they provide their responses to the report, I think that's enormously helpful in prioritizing, how we go about attacking all of these.
Okay, I will look at my records and see what I have, if I can give a better perspective. But the other thing that I was asked to do is to assign a 1 through 5 priority to all this. So that will be addition to the report. Each recommendation will have a priority. So indirectly, it may be reflected there.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these since we will be doing that at our next meeting when the report's finalized. But I did want to ask a question about your disbursement testing. Now, you did, I think based on your comments at the beginning of the meeting, you said that this testing, and clarification, this was the purpose, you tested expense transactions and you looked at, invoice documentation, payments, bids and quoting back up for the items you tested. What is still remaining to be completed precisely with this work? Because you have a bunch of statistics here. What is still open exactly?
The only thing that wasn't done is my exceptions weren't given back to either purchasing or finance, just to verify that they were exceptions, that when my staff did it, they said there wasn't a PO, that they agree there wasn't a PO. That's the only thing that wasn't done, was giving them that opportunity to vet the exceptions.
But these, what you have as exceptions was based on your communication with the department as you were doing the work, right?
It would have been, if we're looking at the invoice and the system and the PO, that if we said there was no PO, then we didn't necessarily go back and ask for the PO, because it should have been in munis. So again, that second step wasn't done. All the rest of the POs were there. These ones didn't have POs, so we documented that as an exception.
And just one other item on, again, in terms of perhaps clarification in the final report. On page 36, you provide information about all the statistics of the work that you've done, how many items you've tested, what exceptions rate you found, et cetera. And then on the bottom, you have a section where you've broken out your test work between, so out of the roughly 350 transactions you looked at, you broke that out between transactions that would have been subjected to bid or quote requirements and those that would not be. And I guess from a clarification perspective, well, and so the numbers are about 80-20 based on what you tested, right? So roughly 80% of what you tested looks like it fell below the threshold where a bid or quote would be needed, and 20% fell above the threshold. But you also indicated that in the years that you tested, you found instances or multiple instances where there were purchases to the same vendor for, amounts just below the threshold, and then those got combined on one check. So in your statistics here, how are those reflected? Are those, let's say, you found a bunch of $2,900 payments to one vendor. Are you putting those in the not subject to bid quote requirements because they technically fell below, or how have they been treated here?
Yep, you're correct, because on the face, the transaction or invoice was less than threshold, so it's in the not subject. The comment was an observation. Just looking at all the data, you can see the patterns. But I didn't add them all up and figure out exactly how many there were. It's just, that was an observation.
Okay, so in other words, to indicate, because I don't know if this is really 80-20 or if it's something else. I mean, out of those items you test, would you say there's a large majority of those that might have that fell into that bucket that you?
I can't answer without looking, again, just because I identified the pattern. I didn't do any analysis. It was just identifying. I could see what was happening.
All right, if it's possible, if it's not too much work, and if you have the data available, I think it might be helpful to just add that so that we can get a better understanding of, what the landscape looks like in terms of, what's going out the door here. Because from looking at this, assuming your sample is representative, you would think that, 80% of our purchases are small dollar and don't need to be quoted. But that may not really be true if, half the items you looked at in that 80% were, really repeat purchases to a vendor. So if there's any way you can maybe provide a sense of that in the final version, or even if you can't provide statistics, if you can somehow give us a sense of that would be helpful, I believe.
Okay, I'll take a look, because I do look at vendor histories. But that usually is a pretty easy way to see. I have to map the vendors, but you can see vendors that you spend $50,000 a year, but it's all in small purchases. So there is a recommendation that talks about evaluating that. If we spend 50, then maybe it should be bid.
Right. And I don't have the page number here, but there is, I believe, in our current purchasing policy, a suggestion that when those types of situations occur, there be reporting of that to the Board of Finance periodically. And I don't think we have done that in recent years. So I just, maybe make a suggestion to my colleagues that that's something we put on our agenda to review. I think that's, that would be an important element of our policy to follow, because this, has is potentially a troubling pattern that's here, and obviously I think that management needs an opportunity to respond to these, but it looks like a red flag to me. So I certainly think, in addition to understanding the details of what is here based on your test work, we should do what our policy suggests and have and ask for that analysis to be put forth before us so that we can understand, what's going on there. So I'll throw that out to Mr. Brown and for consideration at a future Board of Finance meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Alton, I agree. We can certainly do that.
Okay. Again, those were the questions I had. I think obviously when we have the discussion on the fuller draft, there's quite a bit here. I'm sure there'll be more questions, and I guess in terms of your request that we get you back comments by next Friday, is that, and maybe this is a question to Ms. LeClaire, is there an expectation that the Board of Finance would participate in that process, or just the committee would provide any?
I believe just the subcommittee. I think it will, once it's the final report, it will go to the full Board of Finance. And there, I'm sure we will also hear about it and discuss it.
Yeah, and the only reason I asked that question is, when it would be helpful, I think, if we're going to vet this because this report is pretty extensive, if we're going to vet it at a future Board of Finance meeting, it would be helpful, I think, if, Mr. Centofanti had a heads up on, questions that the other 6 members of the board might ask. So, we can ask him at the meeting, but, if any questions we can get to him beforehand, I think are helpful. And I may just put a few more minor ones on an email to you so that they can be considered for the final report. But that's it. That's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Mayor. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something, Jim? Sorry.
Thank you, Mary. This is Jim Brown. Just, Joe, we're going to have a Board of Finance meeting on July 7th. And at that meeting, we'd like to review, as a board, the final report on your results. Are you available on July 7th?
Let me look. What day of the week is? I can't have trouble with
That's a Tuesday.
All right. Yeah. Would expect. All right, there we go. just as far as I can see, I would be, I don't have anything on the 7th, so I could put that on my calendar.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. It'll be, most likely a 7:30 start.
All right, I have you down.
Thank you, Mary, that's all.
Okay.
right,
Mary, I apologize. Can I make one more request for either Caitlin or Connie? Given that the report is so voluminous, is it possible that we get, Connie put together a great little tracker for the internal audit comments, where she summarized the comments and then the status of the responses. It would be helpful, I think, if we could have something similar for the meeting to summarize this report, given that it's my understanding that likely some of the suggestions in here have already been addressed. So, I don't know if it's possible to put together that same, Connie, I'll throw it out to you. Is it possible to put together the same sort of tracker where we can keep track of the, of the comments and the status, and, perhaps the due date or owner or any other relevant information on this report, similar to what you've done with your reports?
So just to clarify, you're saying to take the recommendations off of here.
Yeah.
You'd like to see the matrix, is that correct? Similar to
Yeah,
the matrix that I prepared with the recommendation, the status of the recommendation, if it's been corrected or not?
Right, because I think this report is going to be a little bit cumbersome to review without something like that, and kind of keep track of all of the recommendations in here.
Okay, so you want a tracking system over a period of time. These recommendations will be implemented, and you want to see that they are eventually adhered to. Is that my understanding?
Exactly. I mean, we have, as I said, 50 or 60 items in here, and so I don't think we're going to be able to follow up and keep track of them unless they're summarized in some sort of tracker similar to what you're doing now with your reports.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly possible.
Okay. All right, that was it.
Matrix, yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, is there any other comments, Jim Brown, or can we move on now to item number 4? Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Are you ready for me?
Okay.
Okay, yes. Good evening. Connie Saxel, Internal Auditor, Town of Fairfield. In January 2020, I presented a report to the Board of Finance of internal audit work performed for fiscal year 2019, and also for the first 6 months of fiscal year 2020. And tonight I presented internal audit work for the second half of fiscal year 2020 as of May 31st. There were 4 internal audits conducted during this time period. 1 survey was conducted and submitted to all town departments, including Board of Education, as a result of the audit findings in 1 internal audit, which I will elaborate on shortly. There was also 1 town policy that was drafted and presented to management, and a variety of financial and accounting work was also performed during this time period. I will briefly recap the audit reports for you, and please feel free to chime in, ask questions as you see fit. The first one is the employee credit card expenditures audit. There were 14 internal audit recommendations made within this report. The report also includes a detailed policy and procedure written by internal audit for cardholders to follow, and also includes necessary forms for cardholders to use for documenting and supporting employee credit card expenditures. And although all of the recommendations made within the report are important for establishing strong internal controls, I believe that the 4 most important recommendations made within the report are numbers 1, 2, 13, and 14. And I'll just briefly recap.
Management should assign an employee non-cardholder to review all cardholder reconciliation voucher packages. Annual training should be provided to all cardholders and their supervisors. Town management, in conjunction with department heads, should review the list of cardholders to determine if the current number of cardholders issued to employees can possibly be reduced. And town management should enforce consequences to cardholders who violate the town credit card policy. I believe that if these 4 primary recommendations are implemented and enforced, they will provide the proper internal controls over the remaining 10 recommendations made within the report. The next one is the Employee Credit Card Survey. In March 2020, there was a total of 108 employees who maintained credit cards within both the town and Board of Education. 23 were Board of Education card holders, and 85 were town credit card holders. Internal Audit conducted a survey with all town departments who had employees with credit cards. Department heads were asked to rate the need for each employee credit card in terms of absolute need, moderate need, low need, or not needed. The survey results revealed that 12 credit cards could be immediately canceled. The net result is now 73 credit cards outstanding on the town side and 23 credit cards on the Board of Education side, totaling 96 credit cards. The next was food license revenue audit. There were 6 recommendations made within this report to strengthen internal controls over revenue collections and deposits, including documenting standard operating procedures within the department. These included performing bank deposits on a daily basis for all cash collections exceeding $250, retaining the postmarked envelope for all receipts issued after January 31st to show that customers properly paid late fees, mailing certified letters to restaurants who have failed to comply with the licensing requirements of the Health Department in a timely fashion. Fat oil grease permit revenue audit. 14 recommendations were made within this report to strengthen internal controls. And as I stated before, although all audit recommendations made within the report are important, I will recap the 4 most important ones. These will provide the greatest impact and will strengthen internal controls if implemented. They're numbers 2, 3, 7, and 11. It is recommended that on or before May 15th of each year, the Health Department provide the Sewer Department with an updated report listing all food establishments who hold licenses in Fairfield to be used for fat oil grease permit application mailings to customers. The Sewer Department should commence inspections of all food establishments that are required to maintain a fat oil grease permit. The Sewer Department should establish a policy that outlines stricter measures that may be imposed upon food establishments who fail to submit the required fat oil grease permit payment, and that this policy be submitted to the WPCA for approval. All receipts of payment from customers should generate a pre-numbered customer receipt. In addition, a fat oil grease permit should be created and both documents should be issued to the customer by the Sewer Department upon payment. And finally, the solar panel savings audit. The audit revealed that there were indeed savings to the town of Fairfield as a result of the installation of solar panels. However, the lack of obtaining bids and quotes when selecting solar panel providers was evident. It is not known if better rates per kilowatt hour could have been obtained from other providers or if other solar panel installation options would have reaped greater savings to the town. Recommendation numbers 1A and 1B were deemed the 2 most important audit recommendations made within this report. Research and analysis should be conducted for future solar installations to determine if purchase power agreements actually reap the greatest savings to the town. Other solar panel options, such as direct purchase and install by the town, should be investigated to see if the cost savings incurred would be greater than the purchase power agreement. The option that reaps the greatest savings to the town should be implemented. It's also recommended that all future solar purchase power agreements follow town charter guidelines governing purchases. At a minimum, the town should obtain 3 quotes from different solar providers to ensure that the best annual kilowatt per hour pricing is obtained, while also taking into account vendor reputation and experience in the process. So that was a recap of the audits performed. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Connie. I was very interested in the credit card, report, and I guess
Yeah.
my question is that you still think we need that many credit cards within the town? It just seems like quite a large amount, to have, because that expands more than like just department heads.
Yes, it does. I did send out, then that was the reason why I sent out the survey, was to question department heads to see what the actual need was. And of course, based upon my survey, there was, we were able to eliminate 12 credit cards as a result. However, I'm sure if we did another survey, maybe we could perhaps whittle the number down somewhat as well.
And then one other thing I figured this was probably good for Mr. Santopani to listen to with the internal audit reports, but I did want to thank him, and if he wants to be excused, unless there's other questions for him from the committee members, we can let Mr. Santopani leave our meeting if he would like.
See you in July, Joe.
All right, see you then.
Okay, you're
Thanks.
welcome to stay on if you'd like, but I just wanted to let you know you could leave.
Okay, all right, appreciate that, thanks. Good night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you
night,
for
Joe.
your report and for everything. Okay, sorry about that, Connie. I just forgot to let Joe know. Lori, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Thank you. It's Lori Charlton. And I just wanted to follow up on your comment because I had the same reaction. My reaction is that, right now our policy is that credit cards are provided to whoever each individual department head believes they should be provided to within their department. So effectively, we have a different policy for every department. And, it's my belief that we should have a policy of when credit cards should be provided based on some need. Perhaps you have one individual in a department who's responsible for supplies or, something of that nature. But, to have this different in every department and to have, more than 20% of the town workforce holding town credit cards, especially given the number of findings you had. And by the way, Connie, this is great work.
Thank you, Lori.
All of the reports, this is really good work, and I'm really glad that we're taking the time to review these because it's helpful. And it just strikes me that the whole process is, I think sloppy would be a charitable word, but we've got a lot of room for improvement here. And I think part of what makes the whole process difficult is that we just have a lot of people using town credit cards. And to me, this is not typical. Too bad Mr. Santopani's not on the phone. I would have asked him his opinion, but it just, again, why should we have individuals who have town credit cards? There should, people are going to need them if they're responsible for purchasing, perhaps supplies or food for meetings or things like that. But, when you have 20 people in a department who have credit cards, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then if you look at the disparity between the Board of Ed and the town in terms of the percentages, I would just encourage us to relook at this and perhaps when we address our purchasing policy, one element of that could be, what is our policy around use of credit cards? I mean, they can be very effective because they can make purchasing efficient and, we don't have to go through a lot of red tape to buy small items. So that's a good thing. But I do think it should be defined based on need at a town level rather than having, you know, each individual department head, you know, make different judgments about how many employees should have them. And again, I say that in particular because some of the specific items you found, you know, this is just ridiculous stuff. You know, people don't have receipts. We're not sure whether, you know, we had a hard time figuring out whether some of these purchases were legit. You know, and this is not chump change. I mean, if I've got this right, you said in your report that we are spending, let's see, so over an 8-month period, there was $769,000 in purchases. So would I then annualize that number?
Yeah, actually, that was a 12-month period, but yes, it was almost approximately $770,000 were credit cards, and that's both town and Board of Education.
Town and Board of Ed. Okay, so I mean, it's, you know, I think that's enough, given the number of issues you encountered, to probably, you know, add that to the list when we revisit the purchasing policy, and that would be my main comment. But again, I you know, good work on this, and this is something that I'm sure we'll want to track the progress of remediation on these issues going forward. So that was all I had on that report.
Okay, thank you.
I had one quick follow-up question for Connie on it, and that is that our only credit? Does that include all of the town and Board of Ed credit cards, or are there others out there? And then
no,
you just look at one particular type of card?
No, we have one credit card that we maintain with American Express, and that's the only credit card that employees hold.
Okay, great. Jim Brown?
Yes, thank you. Just a question, maybe more towards Caitlin. With the results of, again, speaking to the credit cards and the total number of active credit cards, so the audit has been done, we had the results. Are you thinking of putting forth any changes to this policy? Or are we going to leave it up to the department heads to make that decision still? Or are we going to kind of centralize the decision-making process when it comes to credit cards, who has them, why they're used, and who's going to hold who accountable to these recommendations?
Really, I believe the first selectman does, but, or first selectwoman. But finance actually is the one who reconciles these charges every month. So I have someone who spends a lot of time actually making sure that every receipt for every purchase, because we get a summary bill from American Express, and we make sure that every single receipt is accounted for, and every department head does sign off on every person who they have under them, and department head credit cards actually go to the first selectwoman. So that is, and again, it is time consuming looking through every single receipt. A lot of these funds, which are now internet payments, which I think Connie also referenced too, is Park and Rec. You know, when they had camps, Bossy and all of those trips, a lot of them had to get paid prior to the actual trip. So those are some big dollars in one fell swoop for some of these. So these numbers look high, but again, if we looked at the Park and Rec, did they mention it?
No, this is strictly employees charging on their personal.
Right, but like Anthony used like Quasapod.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
Camps,
Recreation department.
Those are big dollar amounts. And we do look at limits by employee. But, you know, again, the first selectman might want to visit, you know, who has them, or should we be changing anything? You know, in finance, we have one. But if someone needs to use it, then it's my name on the card, and in effect, someone else is ordering something then with a card on my name on it. So I'm not sure if that would be a great decision either. So I think every department's unique. I know Public Works has a ton because they go to Home Depot and they get screws and hammers, and there's different crews out on the road. So I'm not sure sharing a credit card would be feasible for some of those crews as well. But I honestly think every department is unique, and they have different and unique needs for these credit cards. For finance, let's just say, it's easier for us because we're all in one building and we're all in the same department. It's easier for us. Public Works, for example, they're all over the place. There's people in the garage, there's people out on the road, there's crew, there's tree people that if they need something when they're out on the road, I'm not sure how feasible it is to go back to the garage to go get the credit card. So again, every department, could have their own need for the number of credit cards. But again, we could revisit it and get the first select moment's thoughts as well.
See, just speaking to Home Depot, right? We can have an account at Home Depot.
We tried that.
Okay.
We tried that, and it was a nightmare to reconcile to their bill to try to get the receipts that way as well. Actually, it was worse than individual credit cards.
Okay. I just find it a little uncomfortable that there's 90 some odd credit cards on there. And if there is if there's a way to take a look at this and reduce it, it looks like DPW has 13 credit cards.
86 for town.
And
okay.
Library looks like down to 7. And so it'd be interesting to see as time moves on what we do with these recommendations, and we'll follow up. Thank you.
I think as long as we have strong controls over reviewing the expenditures, making sure employees submit receipts, making sure they're trained so they know what they can and cannot spend, what they can and cannot charge on the credit cards, if they lose a receipt, to use the missing receipt form and so forth, just so we have a greater accountability for what employees are charging on these credit cards. And make sure that the proper reviews are there, that the supervisor is reviewing, signing off on it, and that another party above the supervisor, if the supervisor has a credit card, there should be someone also independent who is reviewing the supervisor's credit card expenditures.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's I would say I agree with all of that, and I understand the need to have them, but given, again, these 14 recommendations, clearly, the process needs some better control around it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that, people, just buying gas or getting oil changes at retail establishments instead of using the town, facilities, and meals, and, Amazon purchases where they're paying sales tax. I mean, this is just, maybe we fix a bunch of it through training, but I do think that, the more cards you have out there, the more issues you're going to have. And I think if we have a need where a lot of people need credit cards, it may just beg a question as to, the broader process in terms of how we get, how we have supplies and how we purchase the things we need, and if we're getting, if we have a system in place to get the right prices for the types of things that we buy on a routine basis. So yeah, if Connie, thank you again for this one, and we should put it on the matrix, and we'll be interested to see the kind of follow-up.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on the other?
Yeah, can I just on the solar one?
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand. So we entered into these current solar agreements in 2011. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
So I mean, I'm trying to remember what solar was like in 2011, and I can't really remember, honestly. I mean, maybe we were ahead of the curve, but we got ourselves into a 20-year agreement in 2011?
Yes, we've entered into what they're called purchase power agreements, and they're over a 20-year period. And the rates, it's a contract, and the rates are in these contracts, and sometimes they escalate over the period of time. Sometimes they remain static and do not change over the 20 years. Depends on the contract and the provider.
Okay. I mean, I was glad to see on page 3 of your report that we are realizing annual cost savings versus, just going through, UI electric. You have noted here $181,000 a year. So I guess that's, somewhat comforting. Maybe we could have done better, but we didn't get ourselves in a bad place. But I guess I'm just wondering if this was if we ended up in this place because it was a sort of a newer initiative back then, and I don't know I have no idea what it was like in 2011 in terms of, you know, quoting from multiple parties or not. But clearly, if we do more of these,
Okay, sorry. I think I can add a little bit to that, is that we didn't pay for the installations, and so because the company paid for them to be installed, that's why there was a long-term contract, because we didn't pay for the equipment that's on the roof. Am I correct, Caitlin?
Yes, that is correct.
okay. All right. Yeah. On the fat, oil, and grease one, this is a great name for an audit, right? The fat, oil, and grease audit here. So this is, and I'm just going back to my notes. So this is the one where we have these permits, restaurants have to apply for these permits, and they have to put in equipment or whatever is needed to make sure that they're not discharging too much fat, oil, and grease into our sewer system, right?
That's correct.
Which would cause harm to our sewer system. And so the big thing in here was that we weren't, you know, the sewer department wasn't billing or following up on permits with, what did we say here, at least 100 restaurants because they didn't know about them. I just, on this one, is this something that's already been addressed in terms of?
Yes, it has been corrected. Yes.
Okay. So we have, and we'll have a process in place where there's communication to let the sewer department know what the right list of restaurants is. Okay.
Yes, I did have a meeting with both the sewer department and the health department, and they are now coordinating to get the list of restaurants from the health department to sewers so they know exactly who they should be billing. What happened was there was a change in employees, and the new person who came in was not aware that there was an updated list, and unfortunately was used an old list, and a number of restaurants did not get billed.
Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, and that there is, I think, endemic of a much bigger problem we have, which Mr. Centofanti noted in his report as well, that we have a real lack of written policies and procedures in these departments. So when we have a change in employee, something like that can fall through the crack, and that's, you know, that's I think, longer-term project that, you know, an issue that needs to be rectified.
Yes, and I discussed that with the department as well, and they are developing standard operating procedures and documenting procedures, and I'm starting to have all the departments do that, because if an employee leaves, at least the new person can come in and will be able to step into that place and perform the job properly and efficiently.
Okay. And then I just had one other question, and this was on the health department audit. Audit finding number 5, you talked about 2 restaurants that you picked as part of your audit had not submitted their completed application and had not paid for their food license. But this was just 2 out of your sample. Did anyone go back and kind of look at the rest of the restaurants to see if any others were out of compliance in the same way?
Well, I did sit with the health department director and the restaurant inspector, and we did discuss these 2 particular restaurants, and he did tell me that he went to those establishments and obtained the payment for the license. And there's also, I did do quite a large sample, and it was very small. Those were the only 2 that I did find out of the sample that I had been, that I had conducted. Okay. Yeah, because I'm looking at their response to you, and they simply address. They say in order to comply, will be sent to the facilities who fail to pay license fees. But you know, again, I would think that hopefully what they did, and maybe we can address this in the follow-up, is
you know, whatever you find in the sample, they should obviously check to see whether there were any others. And so hopefully
Right,
they did
right.
that. But, it's, you know, if you did a large sample, then I imagine
did do quite a large sample. Also, what they tell me is that whenever they do a restaurant inspection, they make sure that they are up to date with their payment, that they have a proper updated license. They will not be able to operate without obviously a restaurant license.
Okay. All right. I didn't have any other questions on the reports.
Mr. Brown, do you have any other further questions? No. Okay. Connie, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about, or should we move on to our next agenda item? You did
I
tell us
believe we
about
can
it,
move
I
on.
guess. Okay. There was one policy that's the draft that's for professional services. Is there anything
Yes,
that you can summarize there?
Well, under former Chief Fiscal Officer Robert Mayer, he had asked me to prepare a policy, and which I did, which now currently is in the draft form. But it's for the procurement of professional services. Currently, we don't have a policy, a written policy, and I don't think it's a bad thing to have in place. We're going to be reviewing it and see if this is something that we'd like to implement within the town of Fairfield.
I agree. Thank you. All right. So I think if it's okay with everyone, because we're running out of time, let's move on to item number 5, which is to discuss the internal audits recommended for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021.
Yes, I presented a tentative audit plan for fiscal year 2021, which, based on amount of time available, that possibly there would be 6 audits conducted, and they're on page 3 of that audit plan. However, this is a tentative proposal, and that I would like to conduct during fiscal year 21. Of course, if the first select woman or the CFO have more pressing audits or projects, or feel that another area of greater significance should be reviewed, then that work would take precedence over the initial audit plan.
Okay.
Yes, Lori.
Lori, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I have more of a comment, and appreciating that this list is tentative, I would maybe suggest that an opportune time to revisit this would be after we review the final DPW audit report, because there may be some follow-up work that needs to be done as a result of that, and you know, we could certainly ask, you know, PKF O'Connor Davies to do it, but that costs money, and it would, you know, might be cost prohibitive. So, you know, some things that come to mind, I just think about that disbursement testing, and I think about extending that to the current date, or maybe, you know, taking a deeper dive into some of the other areas that he had raised, or even doing the work to follow up and determine that recommendations have been implemented. Those might be higher priority than things like the library, but, you know, maybe we could just also provide input as that report gets finalized. And my other comment here is we had discussed this at a previous Board of Finance meeting, but I'm kind of surprised to see that only 26% of your time is planned to be spent on audits during the year, which is really low. And I'm honestly even, you know, wondering if we are following our charter, given that your job is supposed to be a full-time job in internal audit. So, you know, the hours in accounting, 1,000 hours in accounting, can you just, why are we still doing that? I mean, I thought that was project work. I know you were working on pulling FOIA requests last year, but almost 60% of your time being spent in the accounting department, which is really, not what internal audit is supposed to be doing. So, and just given the reports that you've just gone through with us, where I think we've got some incredibly valuable work there, this is not what I would expect to see, 26% of your time on audits. And maybe you can just comment on that.
Yes, due to the staffing in the finance department, there is a limited number of accountants in the finance department, and a bulk of my time is spent doing various financial and accounting work. I do bank reconciliations. I also prepare the capital plan workshop, all the documents for that. Then the non-recurring capital, we work with all sorts of different things. There's municipal surveys and comparisons, and there's spreadsheets that are prepared, and it just keeps going on and on. Right now, as a result of COVID-19, and we are in the process of gathering data and backup documentation so we can submit reimbursement to FEMA. So, of course, I have to, that takes several weeks to do because of they need a copy of the check, they need the copy of the invoice, they need to see employee timesheets, they need copies of everything. So, of course, that takes time as well. And, of course, we want to get our reimbursement. So, that's been a bulk of my time within the last few weeks. And then whenever I have available time, I do audits.
Okay. So I think this is really a question we need to bring back to administration and work with them on how to get Connie more time. She does excellent work, and, we're not questioning that. But I think maybe it's an allocation of resources, which isn't really Connie's position. It belongs more to Caitlin is our finance director, and Brenda Kupchik, our first select woman. So I think those are questions we should bring back to them, because it's allocation of staff and administration.
It is. This is Caitlin. I think we've, the last couple of years, talked about resource in the finance department, and it's low. And that's where we are right now, unfortunately, and things pop up like this COVID thing. And I want to say that you've spent hours upon hours, weeks upon weeks,
yes,
things like this that really impact the auditing function. I think there used to be two full-time auditors.
Correct.
Just given the staffing situation in the department, and even like the couple things that Lori just mentioned, doing physical inventory. Who would do that? Even putting Joe's recommendations in a follow-up. These things take time, and unfortunately, we don't have the staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of
I appreciate that. I guess I just wonder too, given Connie's, she's in a senior level role, and I just feel like bank reconciliations and things like that, from a resource management perspective, it really seems like if we had a junior level person, they could, we could have some of these things done by, a much less senior person, which would be, which I know you don't necessarily have at the moment, but it's just probably, again, from a charter perspective, we should be having at least one full-time internal auditor, and we're not doing that. And I'd like to follow up on that point, because I think that, this is important to kind of do the audits in the time that's left over, because we're short-staffed in other areas, is just not, it's just not the way, we should do it. And I thought, and maybe Caitlin, this is because I know you're still wearing two hats at the moment, but I thought when we discussed this during the budget process, you thought that if you got the budget you asked for, and I know the grant writer was in there, but that's sort of separate. I thought you had indicated at the time that you would have adequate resources to allow for you know, Connie to primarily focus on audits. I mean, are we short-staffed because of, you know, you still wearing two hats and not having a full controller under you, or?
No,
or is
these
it
are not
just-
any of these responsibilities never fell under the controller nor the CFO. We knew that we had been short-staffed. We asked for a full-time person, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. That was denied. We then had a part-timer, and we do have a part-time now helping out with our bond issuance and our refunding. So we're using that part-timer in that capacity. We've taken on more responsibilities, and if you look at the DPW audit, there's, I think, a whole boatload of stuff that is being recommended that comes to the finance department as well. So in terms of tracking receivables and invoicing and the purchasing policy changing, and it's hard. You know, I don't think no one's getting staff at the moment. So we do the best we can. We have another person who does the 4 other bank recs. So bank recs are spread all around. We actually do 2 Board of Ed bank recs due to segregation of duties. So Connie does one, that's the hardest one, quite frankly. It's the one where everything, the general fund cash, but I have 2 other people who do 3 to 4 other bank recs themselves. So we are getting up to speed on the accounts payable because we finally have a full-time person there, but we were short a person there, so we were all chipping in there as well. So there's been a little bit, clearly, of upheaval in our department. Now we have the budget director retiring as well. So, you know, how things might be shifting around a little bit as a result of that, I don't know.
Well, if I might just add something, I think it's more about taking a look at the whole town, the whole structure of the town government, not just one department over another, because there's money there. We have to look at the roles, we have to look at the positions, we have to take a look at the job descriptions. I think there's a lot to look at before we just start plucking people around. And, you know, what I'm hoping is that over the next 8 months is that we take advantage of the time to take a look at how this, you know, the town government is structured and what positions are needed. New positions, we may have positions that we don't have that we need, and we may have positions that we have that we don't need. And it's going to take a reorganization, at least to look at. And this department is extremely important that it has the right positions with the right people, you know, doing the right things, which is oversight, and ensuring that Connie's recommendations come to fruition. So, yeah, we're not going to solve that now, Caitlin. I agree with you. It's something that we'll have to discuss as we move forward.
Okay.
Yeah, sir, otherwise we really have to move on because we are running out of time.
Okay.
Any other comments or discussions? Okay, so let's move on to our last item, which is to discuss a potential meeting in July, or maybe even 2 meetings. So I guess we want our next meeting to be when we think we will have the report available. If we're going to review our minutes, it needs to be 30 days after this one, in order to discuss and approve minutes. And then with the 4th of July holiday, it gets a little tight. And the Board of Finance, I believe, wants to meet on July 7th. So does anyone have any preference on when they would like to meet again?
So would we not try to do it on the 7th before the Board of Finance meeting, or do you want to meet before that, Mary? I'm not sure I'm following.
Okay, well, we could have one meeting on the 7th to approve our minutes and anything else that needs to be discussed at that time. But I think we would need more time if we are going to get a final report and discuss the final report before it gets to the Board of Finance.
Okay.
Or do we want to just let it go to the Board of Finance?
I mean, I think what Mr. Centofanti said was that if we get him comments by the 12th, he would have us the final report by the 19th. And then I think, you know, even if that all works perfectly, you know, that, well, we've already read the draft, so maybe we don't need a lot of time to review it in advance, but that leaves the following week of June 22nd, if you want to do it prior to the 7th, I guess, and stay away from the 4th of July week. So,
Right.
I mean,
So would you want to schedule a meeting for June 23rd? Does that work for both Jim and Lauren?
it works for me, but I would just caution that we can't have any slippage on getting the comments back to the auditors, because this report has been dragging on, and it's just, that leaves us almost no cushion. So we just have to make absolutely certain that he gets all his comments back by the 12th and that he can deliver us the final report on the 19th.
Okay. Okay. So as long as that's okay with both Jim and Lori, I think we will schedule 2 meetings, one for June 23rd, tentatively accept and discuss the final report, and then the second one, July 7th, it should be a brief meeting just to review and approve our minutes.
Okay.
Does
And
that
can
work
I
for
just say,
everyone?
and that works for me, but I mean, I think that the comments that have to go back also, you know, Caitlin, you and others, I guess, have to review that report as well. So you would be also committing to making sure you get him comments back by the 12th. So are you signed up for that?
The comments on the DPW thing.
Yeah. A week from tomorrow.
And you're talking about really corrections to the report, factual inaccuracies, correct?
Right.
Right, correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can't comment clearly on the overall report, but I can, for example, there's already one thing in here that I reviewed that he's going to correct, so I could look at for factual inaccuracies, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, that's all that would be required by that date.
Okay.
Okay, so June 23rd and July 7th then, okay.
Okay.
And then with the
Anything else from anyone?
We got to start wrapping this one up.
Yep, that's it. But Mr. Brown, would the intent should be to review it with the full board on July 7th?
That's the intent, yes.
All right, sounds good. I think we're done.
Okay, so our last item is, I need a motion to adjourn. Jim Brown made the motion and Lori seconds it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone.